this we can work with. I think the most exciting thing about the first episode of Netflix's Daredevil is that it meets the two most important criteria. And that's one, I want to watch more, and two, I think it's good enough that I can see it someday tying in with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which as all these shows, television shows from Marvel, are supposed to be able to do, but I think this is the first one to come along where that actually seems like a good idea. Now, that's not to say this is a perfect show. In fact, it has three huge flaws, and we'll address them first before getting to the good stuff, because there's a lot of good stuff to discuss. But these three flaws are important and a bit of a stumbling block out of the gate for the show, and we'll see how it affects it in the long term. Now, the first problem, the first flaw of the three, is that I think this is incredibly inaccessible to the non-comic book reader. I mean, you and I know why Matt Murdock can do what he can do, but it's not explained, I think, effectively to someone who is not familiar with the comics, which I think probably makes the show seem a little frustrating, a little bit far-fetched, and also to some degree like you've joined a show or a season, halfway through. You're like, I missed the first couple of episodes because I don't understand what's going on here. So I think that I can understand their decision to start the story at this point, but I think it was a mistake. And for instance, where's the radar sense? Radar sense is really important to understanding Daredevil and what Daredevil can do. And it's a very interesting superpower capability. And I'm wondering if they're going to reveal it later, or maybe it's a situation where they can't afford to show radar sense, so they're trying to see if they can get around it. I can say, having watched this first episode, maybe I'll change my mind down the line, but right now I would say they cannot get away with it. Now, the second flaw, I have my notes here if you're wondering what I'm looking at. I just watched the first episode. The second flaw is that it has absolutely horrible visuals. That was my big problem with it from the trailers. I think it's still a problem when you watch the show, and it's just really uninspired. I think the cinematography is plain and as flat as can be, and I was going to originally say it was like the worst of network television, but I'd actually say it verges on a student film, and not like a student film it's going to get an A. Somebody who's just starting out and really needs to pay more attention in class. So that was a little bit, disappointing. Then the third problem, the third flaw, we're almost done, and we'll get to the good stuff. The third problem is that I think some of the acting is quite poor. In particular, our worst offenders are the actor playing Foggy Nelson, although he has some of the best lines, which save his performance. But then also, Junior Matt Murdock is a horrible child actor. I'm sorry, child actor, I don't like to say bad things about kids, but he can't act. And I also think the actor playing his father is not particularly compelling. He also doesn't look like a boxer to me, or that he can take a punch. Charlie Cox does, and we'll get to Charlie Cox momentarily. But I'm just not buying that this is this awe-inspiring, bigger-than-life figure to a small child. It does not seem that way at all. All right, so those are the flaws, and I'm curious to know what you think of them, if you agree they're flaws, and if you think that this series can get over them, it can survive despite them. Now let's talk about what was so good about this show. Now I think by far and away one of the best things about the show is the writing. The writing is very, very good in multiple areas. So the first thing is, I think it's weaving a good mystery. I was a little bored by the mystery at first when they were going over the specifics of Karen Page's legal case. I actually checked my email during that scene when they were talking to her in the interrogation room. I was like, I don't know, numbers and facts, I'm bored. And you are doing a good job. Like, this would be the perfect time for a flashback to Karen's office, just to make it a little more interesting. But they didn't do that. But when Matt Murdock said, "Why are you alive? Why did they not kill you?" I was like, oh, this just got really interesting. And Matt Murdock, you've just gained more of my respect as a detective. So I thought that was really good. So they have hooked me with the mystery. I also think there's very good character development here, particularly when it comes to Matt Murdock. I thought the scene in the beginning when he was in confession was very compelling, and there was a hook there that I hope they continue to explore, where they said, oh, he talked about understanding finally his father. And the priest had to go too far and say, well, do you understand your father? And he was like, he didn't answer him. And we're like, we understand subtext, your father, thank you very much. But, saying, I think the idea of a child understanding their parent when they become an adult is really fascinating and rarely explored. And when it happens to you, as I'm sure it has to many of you, it's a real mind blower. You're like, oh my God, I understand. and just to understand the way DNA works. And also there's I think a lot there as well, talking about his father's bad qualities, and he's clearly inherited some of them. But the way you inherit certain character traits and personality traits is very, very interesting indeed. And to see them show up, to see things that you perhaps thought maybe weren't so great, or you didn't understand in a parent show up in you, is weird indeed. So I like that aspect. Then also, I thought they had some really funny jokes in here, and they were weaved into the story really well. They didn't break the mood. One of my favorite things was when Foggy said, "I don't know how you know who all the hot chicks are, but you always manage to find them." I thought that was really funny, and I also like that Matt Murdock owned up to it. I thought that was great. So the writing, very, very good. Then the other thing I really like about it is how it subtly ties into the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it's a little too subtle. I would have done a little bit more. I think they're worried about being too ham-fisted, but I'd be like, you're a little playing too close to the vest. I mean, you really have to be on your toes to see the tie-ins. But I think it's really clever to be like, hey, there's this whole thing operating in the skies, because most of these Avengers can fly, and the people who they're fighting can fly. There's this whole thing that's going on up here, and there's effects trickling down to like the seedy underbelly underneath, the mere civilians, the mere humans, and there's crime here as well, and this is what's going on here. And it really makes sense that the things that Matt Murdock fights as Daredevil are beneath the pay grade of an Avenger, right? The Avenger's like, hey, I'm just trying to keep the planet from exploding. I can't worry about Hell's Kitchen. And Matt Murdock's like, no problem, I got this. And they're like, do you? You seem to need psychiatric help. And I'm like, that's what makes him so cool. He's a dark character. And I think that edge, the edginess, and also that this is a different plane of existence almost than what's happening at the MCU, totally justifies another shared universe at the Netflix level, but with the quality to eventually perhaps tie in to the Avengers. So I think that's really great. And I think, for instance, specifically, I loved the construction angle. Construction, a notoriously crooked business, getting a boon from all the superhero fighting was really a great idea. And I loved it when that guy who we've seen many places on television at the construction site was like, hey, let them punch each other through walls. It's just more business for us. And I think especially considering all the infighting that happened after September 11th over rebuilding the World Trade Center, it's not only a good tie-in, but I think it's timely to the world that we live in. So I really liked that a lot. And then the other thing that I thought tied in very well, that's okay. Those are the two things, the pay grade and the thing. Sorry, I thought I had another note there, but I skipped it in my mind. I skipped to it already. We already went over it. Then, what else did I like? Oh, there's two things left. Second to last, the comic book teases. Oh, I totally geeked out when I think at the end they hinted that was Mr. Negative, the Japanese guy, because he was in white shirt, black pants, but then the people who worked for him as goons were in black with white piping. And I was like, oh, is that Mr. Negative? You can't afford really to do Mr. Negative here, as he's done in the comics, because really he turns himself into a negative with black skin. And it's really a cool effect, actually, and I wish they could afford to do it. But I love that they're, kind of expanding this universe as well. That they're aware of the different, tying into Spider-Man. Spider-Man can swing back and forth. Maybe it'll be what unites these things together. But, Mr. Negative is largely in the Spider-Man titles recently. But I loved seeing him here, and it was such a great Easter egg for a comic book reader. And I'm sure many of you felt the same way. That it made me excited for more episodes, even more so, because I was like, who else are you going to put in here? This is great. Then finally, by far and away, the biggest asset that this franchise has is Charlie Cox. He's very good in the role. Excellent, excellent, excellent. He has tremendous charisma. Foggy really should watch out around him. I'd be like, he's stealing ladies from you left and right, Foggy. You got to work on your game. And that is a pretty good game to be like, oh, could you lead me around? Let's initiate body contact around my potential office. And it allows for a lot of good jokes that make, Matt Murdock very affable. Like, is this office messy? I was like, oh, Matt, you're such a hoot. So I really liked that quite a bit. I thought his delivery and that aspects were very good. But then also, sometimes when the show would go off the rails a little bit or wasn't hemmed in as much as it should be, I think Charlie Cox almost willed it to be higher quality. And that was really necessary and impressive. So I think he's really an asset to the show. And it looks like we don't have just one brooding guy on television now, besides Jon Snow. We have two with Matt Murdock. And I think Charlie Cox does have a lot of the same appeal and just general look as Kit Harington. So Kit Harington better tell Game of Thrones to get on his character's storyline and development before he gets overshadowed by Charlie Cox, who I think I'll be very interested to see if the people they've cast in the other series, like Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and Jessica. Oh, I forgot her. I can't believe I don't remember her last name. This is ridiculous. But I just feel that I don't know if the actors there. I hope they're as charismatic as Charlie Cox is. We'll see. We'll see. All right, so I'm very excited to discuss this with you down below. Please let me know what you like about this series, what you don't like. Let's have a really honest discussion. I think sometimes, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but sometimes people feel they act like, sometimes we feel like Marvel can do no wrong and DC can't do anything right. Well, let's make a promise to each other to try and be more in the middle on both of them. Because if you don't have an honest discussion, it's really not fun, right? If we've all just kind of drank the Kool-Aid and decided to either love something or hate something. So let's just be honest about what we like and what we don't like, and I think we'll have a better discussion for it. And they should have the same kind of honesty in these production development meetings, and then maybe they wouldn't have some of these problems, right? All right, thank you so much for tuning into my review, and you can check out some other episodes right now.